Welcome to Front Porch Politics. I'm Tim Boyum. This is the show that puts politics back into our communities. Periodically this year, we're going to be traveling the country and talking about the issues that are inevitably going to be seen in campaigns all across this country. One of those issues is gun violence, and perhaps nowhere is it playing out more dramatically than here in the state of Maine. Sure, it's playing out here in the state capital, but it's also being played out near the Canadian border, near the coast, and in the heart of Maine, where they are dealing with a broken heart. The opening notes to a song inspired by tragedy. It's winter in Maine. Bright snow blankets the cold ground, but a dark grief lingers in the air like a winter fog.
Seems like it's just a day, just driving myself downtown.
To an outsider, Lewiston largely looks normal, but deep down, this community feels an intense pain. A unique kind of pain a community feels after a mass shooting.
How was I to know this day would change our lives?
Arthur Barnard's song mourns those lost as an intense gun debate plays out across Maine.
You can blame it on mental health, you can blame it on a million other things, but our gun laws suck.
The national spotlight has moved on, but Lewiston still lives with the aftermath.
Picking up the pieces from 18 shattered lives.
Just ask Arthur Barnard. 18 lives lost, one of those, his son.
18 souls so beautiful, all gone in a flash. An angry, troubled man with a gun tied in his hands.
In Arthur Barnard's home, you'll see a few photos of his son Arthur Strout, better known as Artie.
It's taken me all of this time, 2 or 3 months, to even be able to look at his pictures.
On October 25th, 2023, Artie called his dad.
And I was tired, and he called me up. He said, hey, Dad, what are you doing? You know, where you at?
Artie wanted to play pool.
I almost didn't. And then I said, okay.
His dad suggested Shemenges, and they met up. But after a few games, Arthur decided to head home.
I know I was getting tired, and I had to get up at 4 in the morning to go to work. So I says, I gotta call it a night, guys.
4 miles away, Robert Card hurriedly left just-in-time recreation, then hosting a youth bowling league after killing 7 people. He was now headed toward Shemenges.
I suggest that you go. We have an active shooter, and we're not sure where he's at.
My ex-wife called me up, and she says, there's a live shooter at Shemenges Pool Hall right now. And she didn't know I was there. She didn't know I had just left or anything.
Arthur was just 10 minutes down the road.
My heart sank. Because as you walk in the place, there's 2 pool tables right there to your right. We were about 20 feet on the second table. And I knew if a gunman went in there, he was one of the first people.
Barnard headed to the hospital with his family, hoping his son was not a victim. The state essentially shut down, and a manhunt ensued.
Mr. Card is considered armed and dangerous.
These nurses came out and said, people were asking, you know, is so-and-so here, is so-and-so here? You know, and finally one of them told my daughter-in-law that my son was there, said he was alive. Couldn't tell us anything else. I'm thinking, oh my God, that's unbelievable. You know, really, it's unbelievable.
Sadly, the nurse was wrong, and the next day they found out Artie was one of 11 victims shot and killed at Shemenges.
Joseph Lawrence Walker.
The public would find out at a news conference.
Arthur Fred Strout, 42. Just have a moment of silence. Thank you.
Days later, Robert Card was found dead and the lockdown lifted. A moment of relief, but also grief, for 18 people total ranging in age from 14 to 76. Maine's worst mass shooting ever and the nation's 10th deadliest mass shooting. A nation grieving, Arthur Barnard could barely function.
There was a day where I sat in a parking lot for 5 hours and just screamed, and I don't know why they didn't call the police. I was sitting outside of Dunkin' Donuts. I was on my way to work.
18 souls so beautiful, all gone in a flash. An angry, troubled man with a gun tied in his hand.
In our travels across Maine,
Maine is very independent.
we heard that word independent as often as we saw Moose Crossing signs.
I think that people, for the most part, that live in Maine want to be able to live their own lives the way that they see fit.
Maine is this unique little place on the East Coast where we still have freedoms.
And perhaps no one
This is a
embodies
shotgun,
that
it's
more
12-gauge shotgun.
than the
Yeah,
one
it's
and only
one day.
Rob Duhame.
We'll start with the 22s because this is my favorite right now.
Deep in the woods near the majestic coast of Maine, a man with a passion.
I really did. I brought all kinds of cool guns.
You may not know Rob Duhame,
This is a really cool gun.
but I guarantee you'll never forget him.
I mean, some people are going to watch this.
Yeah.
They're gonna, just to be.
Oh, they're gonna say that guy's a gun nut. I'll be like, yeah, I am.
He's not a hunter, he's a collector.
This is kind of going original, OG, AR-15.
He stopped counting after buying 100 firearms. The massive collection doesn't collect dust either.
So here's the deal with the game. Shoot for the 8, you got 10 rounds. Shoot for the 8, if you hit the 8, you score 1 point. Now you can move to the 6, or you can stay on the 8.
300 yards, a gun, and 3 small gongs. He calls the game long gone.
There it is.
But it's more than a game. He considers it a sport.
When you sit down at the bench and you have to focus everything until it's just you and the target and the trigger, you have to make everything else go away. And I love making that moment of peace.
And it's gaining traction beyond Maine since he started posting videos online.
8-inch gong. And since then, it's grown to, there's people in other states, in other countries that are playing the game that we started playing out here. And that, to me, that puts a grin on my face every time I think about it. First match in Australia was last weekend. They've played a few matches in Poland.
Practice makes perfect,
6-inch.
and we saw it firsthand, along with that familiar laugh. Despite that smile, despite that laugh, he's as serious about fighting to keep these guns as he is hitting that 4-inch gong.
I want to show you something real quick. When Artie was 10, we had an apartment together, okay? We didn't make it with his mother, and I had a pool table in my kitchen.
Pool was a lifelong connection between Arthur and Artie. Artie was married to his wife Christy, and they had a blended family of 5 kids. He was known for his relentless hugs and goofy giggle.
We've been doing this since he was 10. He was 42, so 30 years I've been teaching him.
Artie grew up playing pool, and he died playing the game that connected father and son. After the mass shooting, Arthur felt the need to make a new connection, joining an exclusive club no one hopes to join.
I wonder if there's a network connecting all the other mass shooting families.
Someone suggested a man named Fred Gutenberg, the father of a 2018 Parkland High shooting victim turned activist. One night, Arthur took a chance and messaged him on Facebook.
I told him about my son, and this just happened in Lewiston, Maine. And I says, I would like to know more about what you're doing and about meeting other families from across the country and how it's all connected. 10 minutes later, he messages me back.
A week later, Arthur and Artie's wife Christy boarded a plane for the first time in their lives, heading to Washington, D.C.
They had all the families from Uvalde were there. They had these 20 kids from Sandy Hook Elementary School.
Barely 5 weeks after his son was killed, Arthur was surrounded by people who truly understood his pain.
People need to understand this pain isn't something that just goes away. This isn't like losing somebody who passed away of old age or of cancer. It's always hard. Death is always hard. It's the hardest part of life, probably. But you see these people 20 years after these things happen, and the pain they're still in. So it's not just for my son. This is so much bigger than any one of these mass shootings. This is why the hell haven't people done the right thing?
Arthur met with U.S. senators. He sat in the Senate gallery. He discovered a new mission in life to create change, although that seed was planted weeks earlier. Just a week after the shootings, President Biden and the First Lady stopped in Lewiston.
Jill and I have done too many of these.
According to the Gun Violence Archive that tracks mass shootings, there were 656 mass shootings in 2023, nearly double the number from 2018. President Biden met privately with victims' families in Lewiston. Arthur Barnard says the president went from table to table, family by family. Arthur's table was last.
One of the things he said was, because he had lost 2 children, he says, you'll know that you're healing because there will be things that remind you. There'll be moments, they're triggers. I get 1 million of them all the time, where I have to stop, take my breath, refocus. And you'll get to the point where you smile before you cry.
Then Arthur looked right in the president's eyes.
I don't know what has to be done, but things have to be done.
The beginning of a new quest just days after the end of his son's life, pushing for new laws as one of Maine's most unique gun laws faced scrutiny. After a snowy 3.5-hour drive northeast, we arrived in the tiny Canadian border town of Holton.
Somebody knows somebody who's related?
It's home to some 6,000 Mainers, including Mike Carpenter, former state attorney general, who played a key role in the creation of the state's yellow flag law.
I hate the name, first of all. It's not something I ever came up with.
You've probably heard about red flag laws. Broadly speaking, these laws allow people to ask a court for an order to temporarily remove guns from someone who presents an immediate risk to themselves or others. More than 20 states have red flag laws.
There were several complaints about the red flag concept. The angry ex-girlfriend makes the complaint, goes. I never bought into that because the court has built-in safeguards for people to come to court and lie, okay? And so I never really bought that was a valid concern, but that was one that was raised. Lack of due process for the person with the gun, that they don't have a chance to fight about it.
Maine has a long history of gun ownership and is known for less restrictive gun laws. A red flag law had no chance. So in 2020, Maine passed a one-of-its-kind yellow flag law. Police must secure a mental health evaluation and consider them a threat before petitioning a court to seize the firearms.
I think one of the strengths of the yellow flag law is if you're going to have to confront somebody or if you're going to have to go against somebody who may be mentally unstable with a gun, I'd rather have a trained law enforcement officer doing it than mom or dad or the ex-girlfriend.
An independent commission continues to investigate, but documents and public officials paint a picture where Robert Card's wife reported his declining mental health to the sheriff's office. Army Reserve colleagues reported erratic and alarming behavior and comments. And after 2 weeks of mental health treatment, the Army Reserve in September asked the sheriff for a wellness check after he talked about shooting up places. Never were his weapons removed. In a late January hearing, sheriff's deputies defended their actions in Lewiston.
I remember telling dispatch that it was not as urgent as it was originally sounded when it was given to us.
We should mention in March, Card's family released a post-mortem study showing evidence of traumatic brain injury. So there's so much we're going to learn, but why didn't it work in this situation?
No law is any better than the people that are charged with implementing it.
On January 3rd, in the state senate, the Lewiston High School choir sang the national anthem, the song of our nation echoing in the Senate chamber as the debate over gun reform filled the hallways.
So I finally get to the microphone. She says, well, we can't hear you. I started speaking. They said, we can't hear you.
A familiar face joining gun reform advocates just 2 months after his son was killed.
The first thing I say,
It's not all about taking guns. It really isn't.
I think what's happened here is we as a nation have gotten careless in how we've written our laws.
Gun rights groups filled those same legislative hallways in January.
Having anti-gun legislation is definitely not something that's new for us.
Laura Whitcomb is president of Gun Owners of Maine, a group laser focused on defending gun rights.
I don't blame inanimate objects for perpetrating crime. And so it's very difficult for me to see the difference between assigning blame to a firearm when we don't assign blame to cars or knives or hammers.
The debate across Maine today mimics the gun debate nationwide. We could spend an hour on each issue, but a few stood out in our time in Maine. In Surrey, Rob Duhame points to Robert Card and a lack of focus on mental health.
And it also doesn't help that, a lot of these people that are pushing so hard for gun control are the same people that aren't willing to do the hard work when it comes to health care. Take some of that energy that you're putting on gun control and put it towards health care.
Because the type of firearms that people are using to perpetrate these crimes have been around for 100 years. And so is it an issue with firearms, or is it an issue with where we're at in society, both with relation to mental health and just the fabric of society in general?
You can blame it on mental health, you can blame it on a million other things. But our gun laws suck. They're not safe, they're not enforceable. And until we do something to make them enforceable, we're not going to be safe. No one's going to be safe.
Arthur Barnard personally believes the weapons typically used in mass shootings should be banned, but he's focused on other issues like universal background checks.
They're designed to take somebody's guns away if they're dangerous. But what good is it if someone can go to a parking lot and buy one privately and it's a legal sale? Or go to a gun show and buy one with no one needing to know that they own it? No background checks.
Criminals don't submit to background checks. If you are a person who is prohibited and you don't think you're going to pass a background check, you are not going to do that. You are going to steal a firearm, you are going to ask somebody else to commit an illegal act by doing a straw purchase.
Another huge discussion point, magazine capacity.
I do think looking at a way to perhaps limit the capacity. I mean, these are events, as you know, that take place in a very short period of time normally. Okay, and whether it's the Las Vegas shooting or the Lewiston shooting or whatever, it happens quickly. And I was at an event, just a public event here in town a few days ago, and I literally thought about how much damage could be inflicted on that crowd that I was in with somebody who snaps and has a gun and a large capacity magazine.
It's a popular argument, but also one of the most fierce rebuttals from gun rights groups.
So if we go from 20 rounds to 10, is that going to make people happy?
Isn't it just as awful if I were to shoot one person as it is if I were to shoot two? But for some reason they can put a number on it and they can equate safety with the number of bullets that your gun can carry, and that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I mean, if you trust me to carry one bullet, you should trust me to carry 100. Or you should just look at me and say, I don't trust you.
One area we found some common ground, that yellow flag law.
I think it's effective. I think if it had been used correctly, it would have prevented the Lewiston tragedy.
The yellow flag law in Maine is actually a really, really good piece of legislation. It was a bipartisan piece of legislation. It's full of due process.
I think if the law was utilized properly, do you think the yellow flag law would have prevented what happened in Lewiston?
I think so. I based upon what I've seen, again, with all of the flags of whatever color that happen to be waving out there with Mr. Card, it seems to me that this law should have worked.
So what's next in Maine, across the country? So far, not much. In Maine's 2024 short legislative session, it ends in mid-April, and new legislation must be considered an emergency. Granted, those wanting change would argue gun violence is an emergency. On top of that, as you've seen, Maine's history shows a reluctance to restrict guns.
Nobody can look at me with a straight face and tell me that more laws are gonna have any effect on what happened. All the rules were in place, all the tools were in place, and nobody used them.
Since we met Rob Duhame, he also lobbied at the legislature, pushed by these groups to protect gun rights, as Maine Democrats have now rolled out a package of bills, including a 72-hour waiting period and a ban on bump stocks used to make semi-automatic guns fire like machine guns.
You're certainly not going to see anything radical. I don't think you're going to see any successful attempt to ban assault weapons, which I know has been thought of in some states, or anything like that. Traditionally, every 2 years we have the magazines, we have the safe storage, we have the background checks and that sort of thing. I think there's going to be some pressure on background checks. There probably will be some significant movement on a red flag. Whether it passes or not, I don't know.
It's frustrating for Arthur, who wants to honor his son by creating change and feels disillusioned by what he sees.
But if you take a real close look at the gun legislation, it's so minimal and so superficial. And honestly, it looks more like a photo op than it does like a legislation at this point.
Laura Whitcomb says she feels the loss just like the rest of Maine, but she's also against legislating with emotion.
It's unfortunate when people lose people they love and their tragedy and loss is turned into just like this circus of political rivalry, really. And I don't think that it hurts any less. If you lose a loved one from being blown up by a bomb or stabbed or being hit by a drunk driver, your loved one's still dead. You still have that loss. And so right now we're faced with an individual decided to perpetrate a crime, and now the law-abiding are going to pay the price for that because criminals don't obey the law. So it's hard for me to see how changing the law is going to help. What I would like to see is helping people with mental health issues, making sure that the laws that we already have are followed.
And those two stances here in Maine are largely where we sit as a nation in terms of moving forward. United in grief, but divided on solutions. Back in Lewiston, snow and silence surround Chemengis these days. Outside just-in-time recreation, the words on the wall remind you what happened here. But recent pictures inside show renovations. After a couple months, the owners decided to eventually reopen. 4 miles away, Chemengis owners made a similar yet different decision.
I finally decided that I have to reopen. I just can't open at that location.
Arthur, by the way, was all for both places reopening in the same spots.
And you move your stick, just like a table saw. And that's how I taught Artie how to play pool.
The pool connection between Arthur and his son continues even in his son's death. Arthur took Artie's place in his pool league. He also helps his grandkids and daughter-in-law Artie left behind. Before we left, Arthur wanted to show me one last picture. It's him at Chemengis, a photo we found on his son's phone when police gave it back, taken the night of the shooting. I wondered how Arthur feels today, knowing he chose Chemengis that night, and he left just 10 minutes before the shooting. Clearly not his fault, but grief grasps us all differently.
I don't blame myself. I feel horrible for the decisions I made that led up to this, but I didn't make this happen, But it was very hard to swallow. But I'm the one who wanted to go there. And he just wanted to play his games. It's been a while since I recorded anything, and
A few days after Christmas, Arthur did something he hadn't done since the shooting. He picked up his guitar and started recording.
I just wanted to play a little and ended up writing a song that I didn't plan on writing. Once I started, I couldn't stop.
A song for Artie, called 18 Souls.
18 souls so beautiful.
That first set of words came to me. Seems like just yesterday I was driving myself downtown.
18 souls so beautiful. I'm gone in a flash.
The lyrics about that tragic night
Then you call me up. Said, Dad, do you have time?
a night that started with a father and son saying hello,
How was I to know this day would change our lives?
a night that ended with him saying goodbye one last time.
18 souls so beautiful. I'm gone in a flash. An angry, troubled man with a gun tied in his hand.
There are a few remaining signs of what happened in October, but otherwise Lewiston feels normal. From the outside, it looks like any other city.
How are we to know all this day would change our lives? Picking up the pieces from 18 shattered lives.
Which in some ways is terrifying, because it means any town could be next. And another dad's grief will inspire another sad song.
18 souls, 18 souls. Yes, my son